I retired at 10:30 p.m. to be awakened about 11:40 by a violent jar. I had the impression that the steamer had been struck on her side with sufficient force to move her bodily in a lateral direction. I hastily threw on a long overcoat and left my cabin to find a large number of passengers in the companionway, all anxiously inquiring what had happened. No one appeared to have any information. A few moments later, an officer passing hurriedly answered by stating that he thought something had gone wrong with one of the propellers. As no one appeared alarmed, I returned to my stateroom to assure my wife and child. Again returning, I went out on the promenade deck and soon learned that we had run into ice, that it was to be seen on the deck forward, and I heard a passenger state that he saw the Iceberg pass the stern of the vessel to the height of the promenade deck on which he was walking, about 70 feet above the water. Walking rapidly forward, I saw the ice on the deck and returned to my stateroom. Having been told that there was no danger, and believing such to be the fact, from the general conduct of passengers and such officers as I saw, I insisted that my family remain in bed and await developments. Once more returning to the companionway, I asked our steward who was standing there what he had heard. He replied, "The order has just come down for all passengers to put on life preservers." Rushing to my cabin, I got my wife and 4-year-old son up and, without allowing them to dress but partially, rushed them up on the boat deck, which was just over our deck. Here I found a few gathered and the first boat on the starboard side, number 1, being loaded. As I put on their life preservers, which I had carried up over my arm, the boat was loaded. There was no very evident desire of those present to get off on this boat, and I could readily have placed my family aboard had I desired to do so without strapping on their life preservers. As the next boat, number 3, was loaded, I placed them aboard and stood back while women and children were placed under the command of an officer aboard. I watched this boat safely lowered to the water some 70 or 80 feet below. After this, I watched all the boats lowered on the starboard side, being the odd numbers from 1 to 15. A few were lowered to the deck below, Deck A, and there filled. The officers in charge of loading the boats were cool and masterful, preventing as far as possible all disorder, and enforcing the command to care for women and children first. When boat 13 was lowered to A deck to be loaded, I went to that deck. After 8 or 10 women had been placed aboard, no other women or children were within hearing to respond to the officer's call. A number of men then climbed over the rail into the boat, when someone pushed me from behind and shouted, "Get in, doctor!" I climbed in, and in a few moments the boat was filled, and orders given to lower. As we were lowered, boat 15, which had been loaded from the boat deck, was also being lowered. By this we were, for a few minutes, placed in a perilous position which threatened our destruction. We observed as we neared the water that our boat was being lowered directly into the immense volume of water thrown out from the ship's side by the condenser pump. On the Titanic, this was a stream about 3 feet in diameter, thrown with great force, 6 or 8 feet from the ship's side. It would instantly have swamped our boat. To add to our anxiety, Boat 15 had swung directly over our heads, owing to the fact that the steamer had settled several feet into the water at her bow. Both boats were being lowered when our loud cries of warning were heard above, and the lowering of both boats was arrested. As we had no officer or seaman in our boat to direct us, fortunately, we were able to disengage an oar, and with it push the bow of our boat, which overhung the threatening waters from the pump, 8 or 10 feet from the ship's side. When releasing the trigger, we dropped into the water and were at once swept away from the steamer's side by the great force of the water, the ocean being as calm as the waters of a smooth-flowing river. We rowed off to overtake a boat having a lantern aboard, we being unable to find one in our boat. Having rowed about a quarter-mile, we found ourselves in close proximity to 5 boats. We observed the closing incidents, the gradual submergence of the ship forward, the final extinguishment suddenly of all her lights, the final plunge downward, as a shooting star fell from the zenith visible nearly to the horizon. From this time until shortly after 4 a.m. in a sea gradually growing rougher and with temperature extremely cold, we rowed about, observing in the darkness what first appeared to be a ship full-rigged, but to our disappointment proved to be an iceberg. About 1/2 mile distant, about daybreak, we observed a light, which appeared redder than those about us, carried by several lifeboats. This soon appeared above a second light, which became visible, confirming our belief that help was approaching. We reached this steamer after about 3/4 of an hour and found her taking aboard occupants of 3 boats that had reached her ahead of us. On boarding her, I found my wife and son, who were in the second boat to load, received. Later, I ascertained that only 3 men amongst the first-class passengers, whose wives left the steamer before them, reached the Carpathia, Mr. Carter of Philadelphia, Mr. Stengel of Newark, and myself. The number of women on the Carpathia whose husbands, fathers, or brothers were missing must have been over 50. These men all stood back while women or children were being rescued and went to their graves. One 10-year-old lad, Master Carter, told me that after his mother and sister were in a boat, he was refused permission to enter it, and Colonel Astor, who was standing by and who knew the lad, a moment later picked up a girl's hat and placing it on the lad's head, lifted him up and said to the officer as he was lowering the boat, "Let this little girl go with her mother." As the lad expressed it, they did not stop to examine me, so I got with mother. Washington Dodge.
The night of April 14th, 1912, will never be forgotten. It was a beautiful starlight night. No wind, and the sea was as calm as a lake, but the air was very cold. Everybody was in good spirits, and everything throughout the ship was going smoothly. All of a sudden she crashed into an iceberg, which shook the giant liner from stem to stern. The shock of the collision was not so great as one would expect, considering the size of the iceberg and the speed the ship was going, which was about 22 knots an hour. I was underneath the forecastle enjoying a smoke at the time. It happened about 20 minutes to 12 o'clock. The shaking of the ship seemed as though the engines had suddenly been reversed to full speed astern. Those of the crew who were asleep in their bunks turned out, and we all rushed on deck to see what was the matter. We found the ship had struck an iceberg, as there was a large quantity of ice and snow on the starboard side of the foredeck. We did not think it very serious, so went below, again cursing the iceberg for disturbing us. We had no sooner got below when the boatswain called all hands on deck to uncover and turn all the boats out ready for lowering. We did not think then there was anything serious. The general idea of the crew was that we were going to get the boats ready in case of emergency, and the sooner we got the job done, the quicker we should get below again. The port side boats were got ready first, and then the starboard ones. As the work proceeded, passengers were coming on deck with lifebelts on. Then we realized the situation. Every man went to his station. There was no panic. Everybody was cool, and when the boats were ready, the usual order was given: women and children first. That order was carried out without any class distinction whatever. In some cases we had to force women into the boat, as they would not leave their husbands. The men stood back to allow the women to pass, except in 1 or 2 cases where men tried to rush, but they were very soon stopped. This occurred at the boat I was in charge of, number 14. About half a dozen foreigners tried to jump in before I had my complement of women and children, but I drove them back with the boat's tiller. Shortly afterwards, the 5th officer, Mr. Lowe, came and took charge of the boat. I told him what had happened. He drew his revolver and fired 2 shots between the boat and ship's side into the water as a warning to any further attempts of that sort. When our boat was lowered, we had 54 women, 4 children, 1 sailor, 1 window cleaner, 2 firemen, 3 stewards, and 1 officer. Total, 66 souls. When the boat was in the water, we rowed clear of the ship. We then saw 4 other boats, well clear and fairly well filled with women and children. The ship sank shortly afterwards, I should say about 2:20 a.m. on the 15th, which would be 2 hours and 40 minutes after she struck. The sight of that grand ship going down will never be forgotten. She slowly went down, bow first, with a slight list to starboard until the water reached the bridge. Then she went quicker. When the 3rd funnel had nearly disappeared, I heard 4 explosions, which I took to be the bursting of the boilers. The ship was right up on end then. Suddenly, she broke in 2 between the 3rd and 4th funnel. The after part of the ship came down on the water in its normal position and seemed as if it was going to remain afloat. But it only remained a minute or 2, and then sank. The lights were burning right up till she broke in 2. The cries from the poor souls struggling in the water sounded terrible in the stillness of the night. It seemed to go through you like a knife.
Father appeared a few minutes later. He told us, "You'd better put on your life jackets and something warm. It's cold on deck. It's just a precaution. We've struck an iceberg. It's nothing much. The steward in the corridor says it's nothing to worry about." We waited for ages on the boat deck for someone to tell us what to do. The ship's band was playing ragtime. They played to keep our spirits up. Everybody kept saying, "She's unsinkable. She won't go down." Father kissed us and saw us into lifeboat 14. Up to 50 people got in as it swung perilously over the side. One man jumped into the boat dressed as a woman. As we rowed away from the ship, we could still hear the band playing, but now it was hymns. We were almost 6 hours in the lifeboat, and during that time we had no water and nothing to eat. I kept wondering if my father had got off the ship. That's all I could think of.